imposed sanctions on 9 Russian individuals and entities. On December 29, 2016, the Obama administration also expelled 35 Russian government officials and closed 2 Russian government-owned compounds in the United States. During the rollout of the sanctions, President-elect Trump and multiple transition team senior officials, including McFarlane, Steve Bannon, and Reince Priebus, were staying at the Mar-a-Lago Club in Palm Beach, Florida. Flynn was on vacation in the Dominican Republic, but was in daily contact with McFarlane. The transition team and President-elect Trump were concerned that these sanctions would harm the United States' relationship with Russia. Although the details and timing of sanctions were unknown on December 28, 2016, the media began reporting that the retaliatory measures from the Obama administration against Russia were forthcoming. When asked about imposing sanctions on Russia for its alleged interference in the 2016 presidential election, President-elect Trump told the media, "I think we ought to get on with our lives." Russia initiated the outreach to the transition team. On the evening of December 28, 2016, Kislyak texted Flynn, "Can you kindly call me back at your convenience?" Flynn did not respond to the text message that evening. Someone from the Russian embassy also called Flynn the next morning at 10:38 a.m., but they did not talk. The sanctions were announced publicly on December 29, 2016. At 1:53 p.m. that day, McFarlane began exchanging emails with multiple transition team members and advisors about the impact the sanctions would have on the incoming administration. At 2:07 p.m., a transition team member texted Flynn a link to a New York Times article about the sanctions. At 2:29 p.m., McFarlane called Flynn, but they did not talk. Shortly thereafter, McFarlane and Bannon discussed the sanctions. According to McFarlane, Bannon remarked that the sanctions would hurt their ability to have good relations with Russia, and that Russian escalation would make things more difficult. McFarlane believes she told Bannon that Flynn was scheduled to talk to Kislyak later that night. McFarlane also believes she may have discussed the sanctions with Priebus, and likewise told him that Flynn was scheduled to talk to Kislyak that night. At 3:14 p.m., Flynn texted a transition team member who was assisting McFarlane, "Time for a call?" The transition team member responded that McFarlane was on the phone with Tom Bossert, a transition team senior official, to which Flynn responded, "Tit for tat with Russia, not good. Russian AMBO reaching out to me today." Flynn recalled that he chose not to communicate with Kislyak about the sanctions until he had heard from the team at Mar-a-Lago. He first spoke with Michael Ledeen, a transition team member who advised on foreign policy and national security matters, for 20 minutes. Flynn then spoke with McFarlane for almost 20 minutes to discuss what, if anything, to communicate to Kislyak about the sanctions. On that call, McFarlane and Flynn discussed the sanctions, including their potential impact on the incoming Trump administration's foreign policy goals. McFarlane and Flynn also discussed that transition team members in Mar-a-Lago did not want Russia to escalate the situation. They both understood that Flynn would relay a message to Kislyak in hopes of making sure the situation would not get out of hand. Immediately after speaking with McFarlane, Flynn called and spoke with Kislyak. Flynn discussed multiple topics with Kislyak, including the sanctions, scheduling a video teleconference between President-elect Trump and Putin, an upcoming terrorism conference, and Russia's views about the Middle East. With respect to the sanctions, Flynn requested that Russia not escalate the situation, not get into a tit-for-tat, and only respond to the sanctions in a reciprocal manner. Multiple transition team members were aware that Flynn was speaking with Kislyak that day. In addition to her conversations with Bannon and Reince Priebus, at 4:43 p.m., McFarlane sent an email to transition team members about the sanctions, informing the group that General Flynn is talking to Russian ambassador this evening. Less than an hour later, McFarlane briefed President-elect Trump. Bannon, Priebus, Sean Spicer, and other transition team members were present. During the briefing, President-elect Trump asked McFarlane if the Russians did it, meaning the intrusions intended to influence the presidential election. McFarlane said yes, and President-elect Trump expressed doubt that it was the Russians. McFarlane also discussed potential Russian responses to the sanctions and said Russia's response would be an indicator of what the Russians wanted going forward. President-elect Trump opined that the sanctions provided him with leverage to use with the Russians. McFarlane recalled that at the end of the meeting, someone may have mentioned to President-elect Trump that Flynn was speaking to the Russian ambassador that evening. After the briefing, Flynn and McFarlane spoke over the phone. Flynn reported on the substance of his call with Kislyak, including their discussion of the sanctions. According to McFarlane, Flynn mentioned that the Russian response to the sanctions was not going to be escalatory because they wanted a good relationship with the incoming administration. McFarlane also gave summary of her recent briefing with President-elect Trump.